But there is a lot of science behind gossip, which is why I was interested and curious, because it is something that is pretty common and often has a negative connotation, yet we do it. So maybe we should start talking about like what science says about it.
Yeah. Okay. And I think you started us off saying this too, of like, there's even a history before us, right? Yeah. Now it's term T and all that, but years ago that wasn't the case. But it's something that's still been prevalent like a long time within our society.
Yeah. So I looked into this study and it gave like a brief history of gossip. It's a new study from 2024 about gossip, and it had some interesting findings. But one of the things that it shared was like, it went over this brief history. And so I was like, dang, okay. So it says that in early Mesopotamia, that people gossip, like it was common in different cities and in markets. And then in ancient Greece, a lot of the like literary works, that gossip stories were a part of those literary works. In hunter-gatherer societies, it says that like gossip was like common and a huge part of their lives every day. And then in modern society, it estimated that people spend approximately 1 hour per day gossiping.
In this present day or back then?
In modern society. I don't know exactly. I didn't kind of clarify, but I presume like basically present day society or like current day, that we spend about an hour gossiping. So I was pretty like, I was pretty like shocked by that. Like an hour is a lot of time. But I think like when we look at the actual definition of it, which is just talking about a third party essentially and sharing information that may or may not be true, like it makes sense. Like we do talk in little ways and chit chat about other people. Another thing that I thought was pretty interesting about this study was that it says like basically gossip is like everyone does it, like young folks, older folks, men, women, rich, poor, people of different personalities, like basically any kind of person gossips. It's not just one like frame of a person that actually gossips. And it shared that gossip has actually been like the center, like it's been an important part in terms of human bonding. And to me, like when I was reading the study and it talked about that, it kind of made sense that for something to have such like a negative connotation, but to persist for so long and to be so insidious and such a huge part of our society and culture, like there must be something about it that has us keep doing it, and it can't all just be like bad.
Yeah, I like that history of it, and like some of the history, because there's a survival piece in the history. And I guess it'll be interesting to, through our more conversation, to reflect if that survival is still a piece now, which I don't think so. I think gossip more is just a form of like entertainment and some other reasons we'll get into. But going back in those times though, there's very much this survival aspect, and there's this dependency for like group gatherings and to fun, like the hunter-gatherers, right? Like everyone had to be working together as a collective. And so with the history too, gossip was like helpful because say someone wasn't like pulling their weight or something in the group dynamic, people would go gossip of like, well, so-and-so, just let us do all the work, right? But it was like survival, because then when we're out hunting and gathering, like who we want with us and who we don't want with us.
Or so-and-so don't like, maybe they're doing something harmful. Maybe you don't want that person around you. You know, and there is some research though that might say that even still, like it could have a function to it. And it's the idea that like gossip is just essentially sharing of information. And it also shares information about people's reputation. Like whether positive or negative, like sharing information about people's reputation. And this one researcher just mentioned that that's functional, perhaps. So that it just made me like think about it like, oh, okay. In what way then could this be like helpful or informative? And I'm thinking like, even in present day society, like say you're in a new job and someone tells you like about how this person is or how they've experienced this person. And if there's something to watch out for, well, you don't truly know because you don't know that person, you haven't witnessed it. But if the person is a good source of information and trustworthy, which is another piece to it, that information might then help you, because maybe you might, not have to go down some trap in terms of like doing something wrong, or, maybe your boss is pretty hard on folks, but you don't know that. And so you think like, I'm just the problem, or, anything like that. Yeah. So it makes me think like, well, maybe there is some functionality in it, but also the research kind of demonstrates some positive and negatives to it. Yeah. Yeah. And I like simply put, it can just be that sharing information piece, about other people. It is about,
Well, and I
want to pause right there. Why are we laughing about that? Like, what is it about that? Because there's something there, right?
Because it's like, because it is that thought of just like, why are we talking about other people?
I know, right?
But it's funny because we try to honor what psychology says. There's a positive and negative. So we honor the part that's like, it is simply just sharing information. It can be positive. But we just know the way a lot of us use it now, it's more, not negative per se, but more of like, I want this information about these people, true or false, right? And I think that's a thing of like, let me just listen and see what you're about to say. But my term for the gossip, when you ask like, hey, what's the first word that comes to mind? Mine was petty, right? But with this information, I'm like, it could just be sharing information. Like, okay, that doesn't necessarily have to be petty, right?
Yeah,
so it can be a more positive
And sometimes people are actually sharing positive things about other people. Yeah. So like, oh my God, so-and-so did this great thing. Like, let me tell you about it. Yeah. Or, oh my gosh, I'm trying to think of something like, this great thing happened, or did you know about this? And it may not actually, the thing that they shared may not actually be like negative, and they may not even be thinking about it as like gossip even. Yeah, yeah. But or the ill intent. There's no ill intent. But there you go, like, but it is. But she's not there.
But it could be just positive, like, so-and-so did this on this success. But then, again, it's kind of why we're asking this question today, because then it's like, are we drawn to it still? Right? Going back to Cat Williams, if he was just going to sit up there and talk about, like, this person's great, I got a positive relationship with this person. It's like, I don't know if you would have had the like millions and millions of views, right? Like, no, we want to hear about these issues you have with people. So it is interesting because, again, gossip can be two sides of the coin, but it's still that question of why are most of us drawn to that negative side? But I like that we at least will highlight there's positive aspects to it. And so, I mean, there are some reasons, right? And this gets more to like the specific psychology around it. So just the reasons for why we gossip.
Yeah. So one of those might be around building relationships and basically strengthening bonds with other people, that when you're, exchanging information about another person, like, you may be developing rapport with another person, and that may be a part of that. It might help you build some trust with another person. I know it sounds weird to say building trust with another person, but sometimes when you're sharing information about, something, the person might be like, oh, okay, thanks, good looking out. Yeah. Now, I think on the flip side, though, because there was another study I looked at where the gossiper, the sharer of information, I think the study was like, there's like an arch. So too much sharing, or maybe certain types of sharing, actually that person, that gossiper may not look good. Yeah. And they may not be trustworthy. Yeah. But, also, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and I'll try not to comment on each one.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
But yeah, I mean, I think that bonding part is important because we talk so much, and a lot of our topics, this theme of just connection. And even though it can be, maybe we think it's petty or negative information we're sharing, but there is some connection to it. And I even think about like our interactions in our work setting, right? Knowing like, really our faculty and our core counting department like are pretty great, right? And so we're not all like uptight and stuff. And so it's funny when we're like, let's have a little kiki moment in the hall, right? And it can just be about anything really. But there is something about connection where you feel like you can't have that. But the trust is important, especially in that work setting, because it's like, I can keep key with you and maybe share a little tea and gossip. But if I realize that this is getting out to other people and I only told you, like, nah, I'm not telling you no more stuff. Right?
Yeah, no,
like,
so there's a trust piece. And do you trust that person? And can you build trust by not sharing?
Yeah.
And I think that other articles spoke to, like, I think maybe that other piece of, like, doing it too much or not doing it in a way that's trustworthy for whoever your co-gossiper is. It feels weird. I'm just saying this. Let me acknowledge it feels weird talking about this. But we all do it. Yeah. Many of us do it.
Yeah. And last thing, then I'll. But I think even if we name that, like, actually the work that we do, like, obviously it's much more layered, right? But when you think about some of the surface level things we touch on, like, it is this element of gossip, right? We hear anything and everything from clients. But there is this connection, I feel, regardless what my clients are saying, but it's always just funny to me when some come in, like, I got the tea, right? or they'll even text me, like, I'll confirm the session. They'll be like, get your tea ready, right? It's just like so funny. And one time a client just immediately sat down and she's like, I'm like, okay, where do you want to start today? Well, let me tell you why my work got me egged up. Like, just like, and then went on this whole story where it's just so funny. So it's good because it's this trusting relationship. But even in therapy, I think there's like a place for that, like, tea that can help with that bond also too. So,
and I think you touched on an important piece that's like trust.
Yeah.
You know, like, are you trusting the person that you're sharing information with? The second point is, again, like what we talked about, which is basically sharing information. And there's also like a potential like social and cultural factor here. So, for example, it's like learning about a setting that you might be in. So maybe you're new to that setting, and people giving you information or sharing information can help you adapt to the setting or know how to manage or handle the setting that you're in. So that, you know, could also be a part of it.
Yeah.
Another one is about why is social comparison as well. So basically, sometimes people may be gossiping to like compare themselves to other folks. And sometimes that might make you feel good about yourself when you're sharing or learning about another person and maybe something that they've done not the best, or if that's how you evaluate it. So, you know, it's an honest truth that sometimes we do that. Let's see. You talked about it and you hit it. You said it's fun. And I think that for many of us, like, it's entertainment for many of us. Like, as we see, like, on television and radio and all kinds of things, like, a lot of this is just fun. It feels pleasurable. It's enjoyment for us, usually when you're not the butt of the gossip. But for a lot of folks, like, we're doing it because we're having a good time. It's fun to talk and it's fun to laugh and, you know, to hear news about other people. I guess if you're not on the other end of the news, though.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
There's one more, sorry.
Okay.
It's also potentially like a form of like social control. Like, if you share what someone has done that maybe isn't well, it lets the other people know in the group, like, don't do that, you know, or if you step out of line, we're going to pull you back in because we're going to share the information with other people. So, you know, maybe not the best, but that's also maybe a reason why it's done.
Yeah. And I just had the thought, and really this is a whole other question and discussion, but it's like, then how do we decipher between like the social control and then like the shaming aspect? And sometimes it's intertwined, because the positive elements of shame kind of lead to that social control, right? Because a lot of us have hopefully a healthy feeling of shame. It kind of reels us back in of what's socially acceptable or not. But there can be a lot of negative connotations with shame, and almost shaming others for like things that are going on in their life too. So it's difficult to maybe decipher between the two. Yeah.
And I think it's important to look out for, because, I mean, shame as an emotion in and of itself is not good or bad. And maybe in some ways it's functional and could be helpful. And at the same time, like, maybe too much shame or being shamed, you know, or shaming may not be the best for folks. And I guess my personal reaction to it is, like, if we're sharing information about someone else in a way that is meant to shame them, then that to me doesn't feel like the best means of doing it. You know, like maybe if someone shares their own story of, in maybe about a situation that they felt shame as a means to help other people, that's different to me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, to me, I still feel there should be some limits, but it seems like sometimes with gossip and tea, like nothing's off limits, which is the difficult part.
Right. And that's really difficult, especially when you find yourself on the other end. But also, I think, as I was sharing, like being a consumer of it, sometimes it did feel like this, like, I don't know that I really need to know this or should be knowing this. And it doesn't feel good to like hear negative stuff about people all the time that you could imagine that they didn't want out there and that they felt, you know, that themselves bad about. It's like, I don't know. I can just only imagine when you're the end of the gossip, like it feels terrible.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And to be honest with you, sometimes when I hear, like, we ran us up, but when I hear like something about me that I didn't share with someone, I'm like, what? Like, that's not, like, that is not, like, what are you, and then you said it all not in the way that, like, you got it wrong, by the way. So I, like, in a smaller way, because I have never, like, I'm not a celebrity, and so I you know, haven't experienced that. But in a smaller way, I don't like it. I'm like, okay, no, like I didn't share that with you, so please don't have it come back to me and I hear it.
Exactly. Yeah.
It breaks the trust.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And the biggest piece, right? I liked all those reasons because it puts a lot of context into like why do we gossip, and I think one of the biggest reasons of like why it maybe feels good sometimes. Really taking it back to the basics of our brain activity, right? Like we have this reward system in our brain that just fires up when something's like rewarding to us or piques our interest, and gossip and more so some of these like negative type gossip really piques our interest, and a lot of the studies show that. One in particular was like they had these different control groups, and so they had one group that was exposed to a lot of this like negative juicy gossip about celebrities and people, and then another group was just exposed to just like more boring type stuff. But it literally showed like
their brain.
The brain activity and how their reward systems just lit up more for like the negative gossip about celebrities. So sometimes even us asking like why we do it, there's some reasons just named, but some of it's just unexplainable because it's just this reward system in our brains also.
And I also like wonder again about the reinforcement piece of it, that if like just maybe on a societal level, like if when you talk about like the show that you watch, like if the ratings are higher when you do give more gossip, like it reinforces that this is what people want to see. This is what we should be putting our attention to. Or even on an individual level with like an individual gossiper, perhaps if they have finally been able to connect with another person, or if they are connected with another person and they're getting attention and there's like and this is a form of bonding, I could see how that could be reinforcing to someone.
Yeah, no, definitely. Right? Because that reinforcement again taps in to that reward system, right? Yeah, I like that. And you kind of alluded to this with the comparison, which I think that starts tapping into like the, I don't want to say negative, but just the non-functional aspects of gossip. And that's when it turns detrimental, like for the person you're talking about, but also for self too, because you're comparing self and then feeling almost a sense of power by talking about others and tearing them down. And that's never the place we really want to be as humans. But again, if you think about this society that we're in, there's a lot of competition. And so this influence of like competition in our society, there's a lot of like indirect behaviors that tie to competition. And the gossiping and like spreading rumors is kind of one of those like indirect ways, right? Because now we're comparing ourselves and we're competing in a way of like, oh, I got this negative information about you. Like, I'm superior somehow, right? And so, of course, I always try to tie stuff back to shame because it's so prevalent. But it is almost like this shame attacking behavior, right? A lot of us feel shame, but in order to project that so we don't feel it, we'll kind of attack others with these indirect behaviors, so like gossip and stuff too. So gossiping, like you alluded to, it is very one-sided, and I think that's what makes us so like in the middle of like, yeah, honestly, we like the negative stuff, but then a part of us maybe feels bad because the gossip is one-sided because there's another third party that's not involved, and it can be extremely harmful and hurtful to them with the information that's being shared. And if they find out, and I don't know if I was thinking about this, I don't know if there might be more research on it, but it's like, at least me personally, like gossip can maybe be enjoyable if you know, like, the other person's not going to find out, so it's not fully at their expense. But you have to question, like, would it still be as enjoyable if you knew that, like, this person is soon going to hear this conversation? Because then we know that, like, okay, that's kind of hurtful to them. So I think there's this element of, like, secrecy that we hope for, too, of, like, okay, this stays between us.
Very much so.
That trust. Yeah.
That kind of goes into some of the downsides of gossiping. And, you know, I think you're kind of hitting on it, that it can create conflict with people. You can start to not trust other people if your information is being shared in ways that you don't want, or maybe there's sort of resentment or ill feelings towards another party, particularly like if you're on the receiving end, or if you're the brunt of the gossip. And it can cause like about just plain and simple emotional distress for people, like particularly if you're the one that's being gossiped about in some way, shape, or form, especially if the gossip is like negative gossip, or it's something personal to you or sensitive to you, or something that you didn't want shared widely or with other people. Like, to learn about that and to have your information shared can be quite disturbing to you. Another thing is like just the damage to someone's reputation. Like sharing information about someone that is not yours to share, it could, and maybe it's potentially negative, could potentially damage their reputation. It could lead to being stigmatized, or, you know, people thinking negatively about them, or people excluding them. And so those are definitely things to think about. And then the last thing is that with gossip, sometimes you don't know if it's true or not, and sometimes it's not true. And so you could just be perpetuating or spreading false information or untruths about another person. And that, you know, could be damaging to their reputation. It could be harmful to them, because who wants to have someone speaking ill will or just like inaccurate things about them? So these are some of the downsides and some of the reasons why I think gossip comes with such a negative like connotation to it, is because it can be pretty hurtful to other people and it can be harmful.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's important for us to decipher between like this aspect of controlled gossip versus like not controlled, which probably sounds funny because we can't control all gossip, right? But there is this element to it of the controlled is, you know, it can still be fun. You're sharing gossip. But most importantly, you're actually sharing the gossip with someone who you already trust, right? Where you know that, like, when I tell you don't repeat this, I know you're not going to repeat it, right? And you're clearly signaling that, like, to mutual understanding, right? And I think a big piece of that controlled gossip too, and you're kind of alluding to this, you want to actually share information that's like accurate, right? Or at least something that you were there to like witness and experience, or right, you know, it's like pretty accurate, versus just spreading things that it's like, well, this may have happened, or even when we're warning people about so and so, it's like, well, is that your experience with that person, or are you just sharing what you've heard? Because then it can be difficult for people to form their own true opinions about someone, right? When they're just getting that information from you. So that's more controlled with it, right? A little less harmful for people. And I think a big piece of control too is there's a risk of others finding out, or that party finding out. So really asking yourself too of like, if I'm the one sharing, like, am I comfortable sharing this to that person too? And if so, it's like, yeah, I don't mind saying this to them, right? But a lot of people operate under the guise of like,
what I'm sharing is not, they don't think that it's going to be shared.
Yeah. And they're not comfortable sharing it with the person. So it's like, I don't know if you should be discussing it. So that's an element of control. And really with the controlled gossip, it does try to mitigate some of these like detrimental aspects of gossip. And then, of course, on the other side, where it's just not controlled and maybe gearing more towards like that pettiness or the detriments, is if you're just sharing it with anyone and everyone that's
you're
being
indiscriminate about it. Yeah, you can't be the town's naysayer.
Exactly. And sometimes it's even very intentional, where like, you know who you can't share stuff with because you know they're going to go share it, and you intentionally share it with the person, right? So it's like they can go do the dirty work, right? I just told that one person. They told the rest of the 20, right? And so that's not very controlled. And of course, if it's just inaccurate information. So deciphering between the two, which I know most of us aren't that deep in thought when we're gossiping, but I think those aspects are important for sure. Any more with the research?
No, I think that was it.
I know it can be a lot, but even interesting. I mean, that's what I love about tying psychology with this, and we keep discussing how intertwined psychology is with everything, and it's literally so. Like, we can talk about the psychology of anything, even gossip.
Thanks for tapping in to All Things Authentic. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. For full episodes, find All Things Authentic on your favorite podcast listening platform.